Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Biggs. I'm a congressman from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. I am joined today, special guest, Corey DeAngelis. He's the director of school choice at Reason Foundation. He's an adjunct scholar at Cato Institute. He's also the executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute. And you can follow him on Twitter at DeAngelis Corey. He's knowledgeable on schools and what's more timely than talking about opening up schools amidst the coronavirus. Thanks for joining me today, Corey. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So we were just talking beforehand. So let's rehash a little bit of that. In Arizona, there's two things that I want to cover real quickly before we get too far down the road here. Is that Kathy Hoffman, who's the superintendent of public instruction in Arizona, has said that Arizona's public schools are not going to open up. And what I find ironic and certainly inconsistent is she said, none of them are ready, and we're going to develop some metrics. Well, how would you know they're not ready if you don't already have metrics in place to determine whether you're ready to open? But let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about Arizona's teachers unions for a second too. But Corey, tell us a little bit what you know about Arizona's schools.
Yeah, I mean, the Arizona schools were expected to reopen around August 17th, and now we're seeing communications coming out from the Department of Education and the superintendent of public instruction that you mentioned, Kathy Hoffman, is saying that they're expecting that none of the schools in any locations, period, would be able to reopen in August 17th, even though she didn't have these metrics on hand. So it seems like similar to what we've been seeing in other areas of the country where the public school systems have been fighting pretty hard, particularly the teachers unions in different states have been fighting to prevent schools from reopening and serving families. And so we're seeing this elsewhere as well. And I think it has a lot to do with the incentive structure that's in play with the public school system relative to all these other industries that we see in the United States. Look at how the private schools are reacting. Look at how charter schools are reacting. We're seeing different responses, and I think it's because they know that, you know, if they aren't adequately meeting the needs of their customers, they might have to shut down. And with the public school system, the incentive structure is set up in a way to prevent schools from reopening because they get the customers' money regardless of whether they reopen. Just imagine if your nearest local grocery store got your money each week, regardless of whether they gave you fresh groceries or whether they gave you any groceries at all. They would have a pretty limited incentive to reopen in a timely or effective manner. And I think that's what we're seeing with the public school system as well, because whether they reopen or not, whether they provide students with an adequate education or not, they get the same amount of funding. And so I think that's why we're seeing a different response. I mean, a lot of other industries are pushing to reopen in the private sector, and it's because they know that they don't get your money regardless.
Yeah, I mean, the incentive structure, I'm a big believer that people respond to incentives and disincentives, and I appreciate you bringing that up as an important point. And you also brought up teachers' unions and their role in this. So in Arizona, the Arizona teachers unions are putting together a 6 days of action type of deal, and one of the things that they want to do is they want to send fake obituaries to the governor so they can get that, which ignores, by the way, that ignores all the science, so that's okay. The second aspect that I thought was very interesting, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the Wall Street Journal op-ed from the other day that talks about public school extortion, how unions are trying not just to open it because they want to mitigate risk for the teachers and students, but they want to use this thing for kind of safety strikes or solidarity with the community. So in Arizona, if you read in the 6 days of action, they want to talk about basically coupling up with entities within the community, such as, and one of the ones they mention is specifically is Black Lives Matter. And in LA, the teachers union has said they don't want to go back to school until the police have been defunded. So you touched on unions for a sec. So maybe if you could just expand on the union's role and their pushback, and is it limited to mitigating risk or ensuring safety, or is it something more?
Yeah, well, if we look at all the unions from across the United States, we are seeing a lot of these other political issues being kind of conflated with the reopening of schools. And you mentioned defunding the police. We've seen a lot of different groups, teachers unions that had their National Day of Action just yesterday, where they called even for things like banning charter schools and banning private school choice initiatives, and then calling just for more federal money as well, and then also calling to eliminate police from schools. It seems like it doesn't have a lot to do with the safety of reopening schools and just it doesn't seem like it's just about that. It seems like there's a lot of other political things getting kind of forced into the issue. And look, we haven't seen other groups of employees in other industries doing this. We haven't seen the grocery store workers come out and write fake obituaries to their governors. We haven't seen daycare workers go out and write fake obituaries to their governors. And it seems to me that the difference here is that one of these industries gets your money no matter what. And so they have a very strong incentive to do a lot of these extra theatrics to prevent from having to reopen their businesses, because here they get your money no matter what. I mean, we'd probably see similar things in other industries if the funding went to the business, regardless of what the consumer, what kind of power the consumer had in the relationship. And we're seeing with the teachers unions all across the United States and in Arizona as well, is they have a very different power dynamic than in the other industries, in that they essentially get the customers' money regardless of whether they provide any goods or services. So it's not to say that they're bad people involved in the union. It's not to say that I don't even think a lot of teachers support what's going on with the unions and a lot of the theatrics that are at play here with the fake obituaries and the fake epitaphs. And so it just seems to be a totally different incentive structure set up.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. So one of the things that I've been saying is I know charter schools want to open up in Arizona. I know private schools want to open up, and you might touch on that, some of this private situation of privates that you're aware of. They want to open up. They're ready to open up in person. And these traditional schools don't want to, but they want to keep getting the money. And I guess the question is, and what I've advocated for, and I'm not the only one nationally that's been advocating for this, is maybe what you do is you take the amount of money that you would give to a child, put it on their back, and whatever school that the parent determines is best for them right now at this time, they take that money with them, and that school gets it. I mean, and some in Arizona has some of this, as you know, but what are you hearing about that, and how does that work as a potential solution to the issues that we're facing today?
Well, that would fix a lot of these problems right now. Just with any other industry, you can take your money elsewhere if the place of business doesn't reopen. And that's why I believe we aren't seeing a lot of these problems in other industries. Whereas with education, if the business doesn't reopen, you still have to pay them through the property tax system. And as a customer, you don't receive the services that are meeting the needs of your family. So the way that I put it is, if a Walmart doesn't reopen, you can take your money elsewhere. Even if you're using a taxpayer-funded initiative like a food stamp, you can take those food stamp dollars elsewhere to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or Safeway or any other provider of the service. If your school doesn't reopen, you should similarly be able to take your child's education dollars elsewhere, to a private school of your choosing, to another district-run school that decides to reopen in a more effective manner. Maybe they have better remote learning. Maybe they're doing more of a blended learning approach that works for your family. But the difference is that the money follows the child. Look at higher education too. We have Pell Grants that are taxpayer funded. If your community college doesn't reopen in an effective manner, you can take your Pell Grant dollars elsewhere. You should similarly be able to do the same thing when it comes to K through 12 education, by allowing those dollars to follow the child to wherever they're receiving an education. That still could be the public school. If you like how your public school is reopening and whatever plan that they issue coming out this year, you should still be able to choose that. But at the same time, if for your family that's not working for you, you should be able to take those dollars to another provider of the service that actually works for you. And in Arizona, you have a nice network of micro schools, which is pretty big, Prenda micro schools, where you can still go to work and essentially outsource this process of homeschooling to another home with 5 or 10 other children. And if the money followed the child, you could offset those costs of micro-schooling that way. So that's another thing that we should consider as well, that these micro-schools can reduce a lot of the risks of transmissions of the infection, and it could be a really safe alternative right now. And at the same time, a lot of advantaged families are already doing this, seeking out micro schools all across the nation. We should allow less advantaged families to seek out these options too, by allowing more of those dollars to follow the child. And I know that Arizona already has some private school choice initiatives, an education savings account program, for example, targeted towards special needs students, but that should be available to everyone, every single family, especially at this time. In order to get back on track this fall, they should be allowed to take their children's education dollars anywhere, to any education provider.
Yeah, and I think it's important because what you said there is, look, you may be perfectly happy with remote learning and through your traditional school, and there are charter schools that do remote learning, and there are districts in Arizona that do remote learning and have done for years. That may be best for you and your family. You may like that, and that's cool. That's the choice. Similarly, they might have this kind of rotating deal, like you see at ASU. The ASU is going to do, if you've got a Monday, Wednesday class, you're gonna go on to Monday, and then you don't go on Wednesday, but somebody else goes on Wednesday and doesn't go on Monday. You're going to see some of that going on in high schools and K-12 here in Arizona. That may work wonderfully for you. And that's the point is, we want to allow parents to have choice while we mitigate risk too, because one of the things that's going on here is the American Association of Pediatrics put out something. They kind of walked back after getting some political pressure, but they didn't walk back this part, that children are more at risk without school than they are of getting sick from coronavirus going to school. That's really critical.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out, that a lot of the debate right now is at least coming from the side of not wanting to reopen and still getting paid for not returning to work, is they're saying that reopening schools could lead to increases in risks in certain areas. But they're forgetting the other side of the conversation that I think that you're hinting at, Congressman, is that there are also risks of not reopening the schools. For example, if you harm a family economically, particularly less advantaged families who rely on 2 incomes, or if you're a single parent household that's relying on this income, you may have economic hardships which lead to mental health issues, which I've seen reports of suicides going up from having this increased hardship from the schools not reopening. So I think that's another thing that a lot of people are leaving out of the conversation, that yes, there may be risks associated with reopening, as there are in any school year. There's risks of sending children to school. But there are also risks of not allowing families to have additional options as well, related to their mental health and other issues in the economy too.
And so thanks for bringing those points home. And I want to add something to it that we've been observing as well. So for instance, New Jersey, the governor said, hey, not only will the traditional public schools not be allowed to open, we're going to prevent private schools from opening. In Maryland, you had a local county health authorities say, we're not going to let private or charter schools open. And then the Governor Hogan came and said, you have no authority to do that. So hurrah for Governor Hogan. But what are we seeing as far as government overreach in private charters, school choice efforts, and just opening up schools and getting kids back to school?
Yeah, I mean, you pointed out the big one in Montgomery County, where the official ordered the private schools to close down until October 1st. the day after the enrollment deadline for the public schools, which was a pretty weird timing on their part to pick the day after the enrollment deadline of the public schools. It's a pretty weird incentive issue going on there, but good on Hogan for calling out that that these officials shouldn't have the power to have blanket closures of private schools. But we're seeing a lot of government overreach in other states as well. For example, in Oregon, we saw that they made it illegal to switch to virtual charter schools during the pandemic just a couple of months ago. We saw in Pennsylvania, they passed legislation to prevent dollars from following children to not private schools, to virtual charter schools. And their Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators actually came out and said that the reason that they lobbied to prevent families from switching was because they knew that a lot of families would see the virtual charter schools as a viable option at that time, and that they were concerned about losing funding. So we've seen special interests in states like Oregon and Pennsylvania lobby to prevent families from having options at this time. We saw the Alaska teachers unions oppose a deal with the Florida virtual school, which actually got done. They opposed it unsuccessfully, that allowed families in Alaska to partner with Florida virtual school to access those virtual services. We see North Carolina teachers union right now pushing to get rid of a private school choice program in the state that's serving over 12,000 students from low-income families that earn around $30,000 per year. So very quite low-income families in that state as well. So we're seeing a lot of this everywhere. We're seeing the unions threatening strikes. The American Federation for Teachers recently announced that they might. They actually just said their president said that they are considering quote unquote safety strikes for their 1.7 million members as well. So we're seeing this everywhere. A lot of action to prevent families from having options. And just for me, I don't have one answer one way or the other. I don't think that the government should say all schools should not reopen or reopen. But I think at the same time, families should have that power to take their children's education dollars to wherever educational provider will actually provide them with services. Same thing with the strikes. I don't mind if teachers have a particular issue they want to strike over, but at the same time, if teachers are going to strike and not provide students with services, those students should be able to take their money elsewhere. Those families should be able to take their children's education dollars to an institution that is actually going to show up and provide their children with the services they need.
The key to all this, or what underlies all this, is you and I have maybe perhaps a more libertarian view of this, but the bottom line is you want our kids to have the opportunity to be educated in the best environment for them, and not have further delay and hindrance, and fall further behind, and that's, I think that's really what we're getting at here is. And so when people talk about risk, so we've been talking about school choice, we've been talking about access to schools, we've been talking about those who are trying to hinder that. And one of the things they talk about is risk. And yet the CDC that they always rely on has come out and said the chance of a child fatality due to coronavirus is literally 1 in a million. 1 in a million. And that's remarkable. I mean, we don't want any child to die. We don't want any teachers to die. We don't want anyone to get sick. We know that some will get sick every year like they do with flu. But the catch rate on flu is, they anticipate, quite frankly, that it's 4 to 5 times as high as the catch rate of COVID. And the fatality rate is far higher on everything from drownings to flu rate than COVID-19 for children. So I think we can make the argument that the risk is mitigated enough that for both teachers and students to get back to school. And that's really, whatever they choose their school to be, that's what we need to have happen.
Yeah, and if a family is is still concerned about sending their children back to schools, they shouldn't have to do that either. And, you know, if the public school makes the right decision, if the public school district makes a good decision whether to reopen or not, the family should still be able to choose that. If the remote learning is the right decision for that school district, well, then families will choose that option. But if it's not the right decision, if you're in a particular location where it's safe and the families would like to return their children to schools safely, then they should be able to have that option too. And if the school's district makes the wrong decision one way or the other, the family should be able to take their children's education dollars elsewhere, whether it's a private school, charter school, or even a homeschool option, or a micro school.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, we shouldn't lock children and their families into a situation that they believe is disadvantageous to them or is going to hinder their child. Not when there's so many, particularly when there's so many options in so many places today, so many ways to get a very quality education. And that's really what I'm advocating. I know you sounds like you're advocating. We're on the same page on that. With that, Corey, I want to thank you for your work in this area. We keep pushing it. I hope that, you know, look, I'm a big believer. Sometimes, you know, a traditional public school works great. Maybe it's virtual learning, maybe it's homeschool, maybe it's a charter school. Whatever the parent and the child determines is best for them. That's one of the blessings about Arizona. I will just say this: Arizona has a pretty broad array of choice, and I've known people who've had one kid in traditional, another kid in a charter, and they've been homeschooling another kid, and then yet a fourth child has been going to some kind of private school, all from the same family, because each child learns differently, processed differently, needed a different environment in which to learn. That's really one of the blessings and benefits of living in this age where you can get virtual learning, you can get to a charter, you can get to a traditional, and I think we're really seeing the necessity of that and how important that is in children's learning today. But thanks, Corey. I'll give you last word here on the topic if you wish.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks you, Congressman, for having this discussion with me. But I think you're right that right now, I think people are seeing the need for school choice more than ever. I mean, families have always gotten the short end of the stick when it comes to K-12 education. But right now, it's becoming more and more obvious that schools aren't even reopening, and they're actively pushing to remain closed and not provide those services that would have been provided to families any other year. And, families are having to do a lot of the work when it comes to, watching their children during this time if the schools don't reopen, and they're having to help a lot with the education as well if the remote education isn't adequate. And I think families are seeing that they're not being included in the conversations, and a lot of it has to do with the money not following the child. And so I think a lot of families are seeing the need for school choice, and perhaps as a result of all of this, we'll see an expansion of school choice programs such as education savings accounts in Arizona and elsewhere.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. Corey DeAngelis, Reason Foundation, thank you for being with us, and best of luck, and keep up your advocacy. I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you.